We're going to talk a bit today. Robbie's going to do most of the speaking about his project. He's a graduate student that Paul and I have been advising, and his work is on nitrogen management. And most of our work over the last 4 years in the pilot program has been on a couple of things. One is nitrogen management, and primarily weed management. So I'll say just a little bit about weed management. We won't present as much data on that today as we will on nitrogen. We've looked at a number of different herbicides, and we realized that some growers would not choose to perhaps apply pesticides to hemp, and others would certainly like some options in the future. So I'm going ahead here for some reason. Our research with pesticides, of course, has been proactive since nothing is currently legal, but we anticipate having some ways to have registered pesticides in the future. It's been interesting because I'm trained in weed science, but when I started looking at some herbicides on hemp, I had no idea what I was going to see, and still don't on new things I try. Bottom line, most of the things we've tried on hemp have injured it to some extent, some to such an extent that they would never be considered, but we do have some promising options. One of the things we started this year, and we're going to continue next year and hopefully report to you next year on that, is a herbicide screening on several different hemp varieties. One thing we've noticed is we think we are seeing some varietal response to different herbicides where the same herbicide would injure some varieties more than others. Tallow was gracious in providing us several different varieties that we were screening, and we're going to try to do that work again this year and report some of that data next year. I wanted to, before we get started, talk a little bit about our season there in Bowling Green. We do this work on the university farm there. We do have fortunate to have a mesonet weather station there about 100 yards from the hemp plot, so we have very site-specific weather data, and these are the results from that mesonet. We got a late planting because we had wet weather and wet soils, so this study we're talking about here today was planted in the second day of June, and we did receive good rainfall and had good soil moisture for germination and emergence. We got almost a little bit too much, a little over 2.5 inches in 48 hours after planting, so we did have a little bit of washing in the field, not too much, and a little bit of soil crusting in certain areas. But overall, this study had pretty good germination and emergence, and that's been something we've struggled with on a few other studies over the years. More of a typical July, a little bit wetter August than normal, and September was really not wet all that much except for one day, and that was right before we planned to harvest, and those were the remnants of Hurricane Harvey. We had 5.5 inches, and as some of you know, hemp has some issue with shattering, some varieties more than others. But once Hurricane Harvey moved through, we did have quite a bit of seed shattering, so that did influence some of the grain yield data that you'll see Robbie present later on today. Regarding nitrogen, looking at some of the work from Canada, there's quite a bit of work there. I don't know that there's a definitive answer for all situations. Any of you that have farmed, you know that nitrogen is a complex nutrient in how it responds and how the soil and the weather influences it, and the kind of losses you can have from the field. So perhaps one size does not fit all with nitrogen. So there's a wide range of amounts that Canada has looked at that perform. Some people say, well, hemp will grow without nitrogen. It will, but certainly to maximize yield and profit, we're going to need some supplemental fertility. Some reports that the nitrogen requirements are going to vary between cultivars. So looking at some of this data, what you're going to see Robbie present, we chose kind of a middle ground number of 140 pounds per acre and went down from that 70 and up 70 to try to get a range and see a rate response. Weeds have been a significant problem from some growers, and from what I've heard and seen and what I've seen on our farm over the last 4 years, we have fields where without any herbicide and with quick germination and emergence, we didn't have too much weed problem. And we have other fields that were complete disasters and crop losses because of weeds. So there's a lot of factors involved there. Again, nothing's registered. We don't market any of this, of course. That would be illegal. We do a crop destruct. But we've looked at several different things. One of the things Robbie's going to talk about in this study, which combines both nitrogen fertility and weed control in one study, would be what most of you would know as the herbicide prowl or pendimethalin. It's one that we've looked at for a few years and seems to be one of the more promising herbicide potential choices in the future, if that is available in the future. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Woosley. He's going to have a few comments, and then Robbie will present his data.
Just thank you for having us today. I hope you're excited. We're excited about some of the news that we're hearing out of Washington and the hopes of decoupling industrial hemp from marijuana, making it legal. Dr. David Williams will tell you that's going to be a big step in helping us conduct more meaningful research, being able to get that decoupled and hopefully getting federal dollars allowed for research. And since that time, I want to thank all of our cooperators and you that's in this room that are supporting research at the different universities, because without that we wouldn't be able to do the work that we're doing. Before I turn it over to Robbie, I just want to say, I want to talk a little bit about some other research that we're doing. I'm not going to bog you down with data, but we've been looking at different establishment methods, obviously, especially with an annual crop, but with any crop, the crop's only ever going to be as good as it is in establishment time, and you need to put a lot of effort and to ensure good establishment. And so we've looked at no-tilling industrial hemp. We've looked at growing a winter annual cereal rye and spraying them down and crimping them to form a mulch layer and no-tilling into that to hopefully reduce weed control. We looked at growing a stand of white clover and spraying strips of Roundup and planting into that. Hopefully the white clover would suppress weeds and also provide nitrogen for the hemp. We've looked at conventional tillage and seeding hemp and followed by cultipacking. We've looked at conventional tillage, cultipacking, and then broadcasting hemp and then lightly dragging. All that being said, none of that worked really well. The best way that we've found to establish hemp is if you can get a Hurricane Harvey to come and dump 5 inches of rain and shatter it out on the ground, and then it germinates really well. But it's hard to get those things in earlier in May and June. They tend to happen in August and September. But our most successful method is a conventional till and using some type of row planter to plant the hemp into the soil, and that's what our recommendations would be at this point in time until we can further hone some other different methods that might work as well. So we'll continue to work on that. Hopefully we'll have some more interesting data, some more options for you in the future. So with that, I'm going to hush and turn it over to Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson is just finishing up his master's degree, but Dr. King's already promoted him to a PhD, so he appreciates that. So you can call him Dr. Anderson, but he's an Owensboro, Kentucky native. Did his undergraduate with us and continued on with an MS, and he's been instrumental in our industrial hemp research. So, Robbie?
Thank you very much, Dr. Woosley. Going with that, what we looked at was different nitrogen rates on industrial hemp and the herbicide use that we were looking at. With the rates, we also did a timing study. It was 2 different experiments that I was doing with my MS. Here's my materials. We used the cultivar Helena. We planted it at 38 pounds an acre. We planted it, like Dr. Willen said, on June 2nd. And here's my plot size, just 10 by 15. We replicated it 4 times for each one of my experiments. We used the prowl, and then our data collector, we were looking at stand counts, plant heights, biomass, seed yield, and fiber yields. So looking at how I set up my experiment, for the rate study, we did 70, 140, 210 in a control, nothing used. And then subplotted that with a control and prowl. So half my plots were sprayed, the other side was left untouched. With the nitrogen timing, we looked at 3 different timings: at establishment, side dress, and then split application, and then the control, also nothing added. So here at my first, this is the nitrogen rate. We're looking at plant populations and seeing the effects from the rates Going through the rates for stand counts, it's not, didn't really affect it, and there's no significance between any of the rates. Coming to heights, as you go through the different values going up to 10 and 10, they increase somewhat, but there's no significance between any of them, so there's really no difference. When we start seeing the difference is when we get to some of my grain yields. But here's a picture of just showing the different plant heights. Anywhere in my field, I could have a plant that was 6 foot tall to 10 foot tall, and that's dispersed everywhere. It was like that without trying. I mean, there was no plant that was just evenly all the way across. Here coming to our biomass, this is what I was talking about. We start seeing 140 and 210 pushing through, showing that the extra nitrogen was needed to help with our yields. And this kind of correlates with some of our fiber yields that I will show here in a little bit. Seed yield, the higher nitrogen rates give better grain yields. The control and the 70 pounds just didn't quite get it there, but when you give it to about 140 to 210, that's when you would need the nitrogen, especially if you're growing for seed. Looking here at the fiber yields, this is where I was saying some of the higher nitrogen rates would be needed. 210 for sure would be one you would want to look at, especially for the economic side. Everybody wants higher yields. This is one that you'd want to probably use. These are no different though if somebody was trying to save money. Now coming to the herbicide application of the first study I did with the nitrogen rate, here's the control versus my prow that I used. You can tell there's a huge difference in the stand counts between the two. Looking at plant population, this was affected also by the prow. This was 2 weeks after my planting. This is the side we sprayed with prow. That is the side of the prow, this side of the control. You can see the difference between all 4 of my reps going back, that it's just, looks like it's nuked and it's not going to give you any kind of yields. But going back, looking at it 5 weeks later, it's kind of outgrown that stunted growth. Coming into the nitrogen timing experiment, we were looking at some the different timings of split application, control, plant, and side dress. The timings did not influence plant height, stand count, or grain yields. And you can see this with the grain yields, they're all pretty evenly across, just by the different timing applications. The hemp height for the herbicide in this study, the control always had a higher after 4 weeks versus the prow. This is the same we saw in the other experiment that we were looking at. And then stand counts, prow had lower stand counts also. The control higher. That's the same with the pictures I was showing earlier. Here's the recovery from the herbicide injury. Looking at that picture, you can never tell that I added any herbicide to those plots. This is where things got interesting though for this study with the timing. The added herbicide, prow, had higher grain yields. We kind of believe that has something to do with less plant population. There was more branching. It produced more seeds that way. And that's why we kind of figure there is a higher grain yield for the nitrogen timing study. And the other study, it was trending, but it wasn't quite significant enough to make it show us a difference. And with our conclusion, prow stunted hemp, but it was able to overcome it. Hemp recovered from the prow quickly, and it had greater seed yield. And then nitrogen rates of 140 to 210 pounds increased biomass. Nitrogen rate of 210 pounds increased fiber yields compared to control plots. And this all correlates back with what Canadian research is showing of the 90 to 180 pounds could be an optimal range for hemp production. And with that, we would need further studies and do another year or two data, give you more precise numbers.
we'll be around today, so if you got more questions, come by and see us. Thank you very much.